Back in the 1980s, people ate foods that would get you fined, or even arrested today. Looser regulations meant shocking ingredients made it to the dinner table without a second thought. Let's uncover foods that were totally normal then, but are outright illegal now. Plenty of people remember cracking open a can of sardines back in the 1980s, peeling back the tin lid to reveal those little fish packed in oil, brine, or in some cases, a chemical cocktail no one thought twice about. Canned sardines were an easy, affordable protein source, found in lunchboxes, kitchen pantries, and late-night snacks across the country. But while they seemed simple, many brands were anything but. Back then, food manufacturers relied on artificial preservatives, including sodium benzoate and BHA, to keep sardines shelf-stable for years. Some products also contained polyphosphates, which helped retain moisture but were later linked to kidney issues when consumed excessively. And let's not forget monosodium glutamate, often added to enhance flavor, though it was more of a cover-up for low-quality fish than a culinary bonus. Regulations on food additives weren't nearly as strict in the 80s, and consumer protection laws were still catching up with science. The FDA allowed certain preservatives that would later be restricted due to emerging research on long-term health risks. By the 1990s, tighter regulations led to a decline in these additives, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. For decades, apples were the picture of health, an easy, wholesome snack tossed into lunchboxes, baked into pies, or sliced up after school. But in the 1980s, that simple fruit became the center of one of the biggest food safety controversies in American history. The culprit? A chemical growth regulator called Alar. First introduced in the 1960s, Alar, also known as diminazide, was used by apple growers to improve color, firmness, and shelf life. It helped apples ripen uniformly and reduced early fruit drop, which meant better-looking produce and less waste. Supermarkets loved it, farmers swore by it, and consumers unknowingly ate it for years. That is, until researchers found something alarming. Alar broke down into a compound called UDMH, which was linked to cancer in lab animals. The controversy exploded in 1989 when a 60 Minutes expose labeled apples as the most dangerous food in American grocery stores. Parents panicked, schools removed apples from cafeterias, and the entire industry scrambled to respond. Under mounting pressure, the EPA banned Alar for food use, and apple growers had to pivot fast. By the 1980s, store-bought pudding had become a staple in American households. Creamy, convenient, and kid-approved, it was an easy dessert that required no effort. Just peel back the foil lid and dig in. But what many people didn't realize was that their favorite tapioca pudding contained an ingredient that would later be banned in several countries: Carrageenan. Extracted from red seaweed, Carrageenan was widely used as a thickening and stabilizing agent in dairy products. It gave pudding a smooth, uniform texture while preventing separation, making it a dream ingredient for food manufacturers. But there was a catch. Studies later suggested that Carrageenan could trigger digestive inflammation and even contribute to serious gastrointestinal issues, including ulcerative colitis. For decades, the FDA and other regulatory agencies debated its safety. While food manufacturers insisted it was harmless in small amounts, consumer advocacy groups pushed for stricter oversight. Eventually, growing health concerns led to Carrageenan being banned in certain organic products and phased out of many conventional foods. Despite the controversy, pudding sales never really suffered. Manufacturers simply reformulated their recipes, and shoppers continued grabbing their favorite brands off the shelves. For centuries, high-end banquets and luxury dining experiences often featured dishes meant to impress, and in many cultures, nothing signaled status quite like a bowl of shark fin soup. Served at weddings, celebrations, and even business deals, it was a symbol of wealth, generosity, and tradition. One that came at a steep price, not just for consumers, but for the ocean itself. By the 1980s, global demand for shark fins had skyrocketed, leading to a brutal practice known as shark finning. Fishermen would catch sharks, slice off their fins, and toss the often still-living animals back into the water to die. It was wasteful, devastating to shark populations, and an ecological disaster in the making. Over time, marine scientists raised alarms, warning that shark finning was pushing several species toward extinction and disrupting entire ocean ecosystems. Despite the environmental concerns, the dish remained popular, with many consumers unaware or unconcerned about its impact. Meanwhile, food safety advocates pointed out another problem. Shark meat is high in mercury, making frequent consumption a serious health risk. For generations, sweetened condensed milk was a kitchen essential. It made its way into homemade fudge, classic pies, and that ever-popular 80s favorite, key lime pie. Thick, creamy, and packed with enough sugar to satisfy any sweet tooth, it was a staple in American pantries. But while the contents of the can were beloved, the can itself turned out to be the real problem. Throughout the 20th century, food manufacturers lined metal cans with bisphenol A, a chemical designed to prevent corrosion and extend shelf life. It seemed like a practical solution, but there was a downside. BPA is an endocrine disruptor, meaning it can interfere with hormones. Studies later linked it to potential health risks, including fertility issues, developmental problems, and even increased cancer risk. And yet, for decades, consumers had no idea they were getting more than just milk and sugar with every spoonful. By the late 2000s, as public concern grew, regulatory agencies began imposing restrictions. Many food companies voluntarily switched to BPA-free packaging, though debates over the chemical's safety continued. By the mid-20th century, pesticides were seen as a miracle of modern farming. They promised bigger harvests, fewer pests, and better-looking produce on grocery store shelves. But one chemical stood out above the rest: DDT, or dichlorodiphenyl-trichloroethane. Used on everything from potatoes to tomatoes, it kept insects at bay and crops thriving. For decades, consumers unknowingly ate vegetables treated with a substance that would later become one of the most infamous banned chemicals in history. DDT wasn't just popular, it was everywhere. First introduced in the 1940s, it became the go-to pesticide for farmers, widely used in the United States through the 60s and still lingering in some agricultural products into the 1980s. At first, it seemed like a perfect solution to pest problems, but cracks in that perception started to show. Scientists began linking DDT exposure to serious health risks, including liver damage, reproductive issues, and even cancer. Worse, it didn't just affect humans. It devastated bird populations, thinning eggshells and leading to drastic declines in species like the bald eagle. The turning point came in 1972 when the EPA officially banned DDT for agricultural use in the U.S. However, residue from past treatments lingered in the soil, and some imported produce still carried traces into the 1980s. For decades, canned goods were a symbol of convenience. They lined pantry shelves, ready to be popped open for a quick meal or a last-minute dessert. Among them, canned peaches stood out, sweet, syrupy, and a staple in everything from cobblers to lunchbox fruit cups. But while the peaches themselves were harmless, the cans they came in were hiding a serious risk: lead solder. Up until the late 1980s, many tin cans were sealed using lead-based solder, a practice that unknowingly exposed consumers to one of the most toxic heavy metals. Over time, the acidic syrup in canned peaches and other fruits would react with the metal, causing lead to leach into the food. The longer the can sat on the shelf, the greater the risk. Scientists eventually confirmed what health experts had long suspected. Lead exposure, even in small amounts, can cause developmental issues in children, neurological problems, and long-term organ damage. In response, the FDA and other health agencies pushed for change. By 1991, lead-soldered food cans were officially banned in the U.S., forcing manufacturers to switch to safer materials. For centuries, fresh milk came straight from the farm, unprocessed, unpasteurized, and, at least to its supporters, completely pure. By the 1980s, raw milk was still widely consumed in rural communities and health-conscious circles, with some swearing by its superior taste and supposed nutritional benefits. But public health officials saw things differently. and eventually, the debate over raw milk became a battle between tradition and safety. Unlike the pasteurized milk found in grocery stores, raw milk skips the heating process that kills harmful bacteria. Advocates claimed this preserved beneficial enzymes and nutrients, but there was a significant risk. Raw milk could carry dangerous pathogens, including Salmonella, Listeria, and E. coli. Outbreaks linked to raw dairy led to serious illness and, in some cases, fatalities. Regulators took action. The FDA banned interstate sales of raw milk in 1987, and individual states began imposing their own restrictions. Some outlawed it entirely, while others allowed sales under strict conditions, often requiring direct purchases from farms. Despite the risks, raw milk still has a loyal following, with advocates arguing that modern hygiene practices make it safer. Few foods capture the nostalgia of childhood quite like a bowl of wobbly, neon-colored gelatin. Whether layered in a church potluck dish or molded into some questionable 80s creation, Jell-o was an undeniable staple of American households. It was cheap, easy to make, and came in colors that didn't exist in nature, literally. The vibrant hues that made Jell-o so iconic came from artificial food dyes, some of which were later linked to health risks. Red number 3, for example, was widely used in gelatin products before studies connected it to thyroid tumors in lab animals. Yellow number 5 and blue number 1, both common in Jell-o, were also scrutinized for potential behavioral effects in children. While food manufacturers insisted these dyes were safe in small amounts, consumer advocacy groups weren't convinced. By the 1990s and 2000s, some countries, including parts of Europe, began banning or restricting certain artificial colors. In the US, the FDA placed stricter regulations on labeling, and some brands voluntarily reformulated their products. Despite concerns, Jell-o remained a household favorite, proving that nothing, not even a little controversy, could shake its place in American kitchens. By the 1980s, diet culture was booming, and food companies were on a mission to make everything sugar-free. From sodas to snack cakes, artificial sweeteners promised all the sweetness without the calories. One of the most popular and controversial was sodium cyclamate, a chemical sweetener that had already been banned in the US but was still widely used in other countries. First introduced in the 1950s, cyclamate was 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar and far cheaper to produce than alternatives like saccharin. It quickly became a favorite in diet sodas and low-calorie desserts. But in 1969, everything changed when studies linked it to bladder cancer in lab rats. The FDA wasted no time, banning it in the US despite ongoing debates over whether the findings applied to humans. Meanwhile, cyclamate continued to be used in over 50 countries, including Canada and parts of Europe, where regulators determined it was safe in controlled amounts. Even today, some experts argue that the original studies were flawed and that the ban was premature. Regardless, Americans had to look elsewhere for their artificial sweetness, leading to the rise of aspartame and sucralose. Crispy, golden, and impossible to resist, French fries have been a fast food staple for generations. Whether served in diners, drive-thrus, or school cafeterias, they were a go-to side for just about any meal. But in the 1980s, some imported French fries came with an extra ingredient that no one ordered: malachite green, a synthetic dye that would later be classified as a carcinogen. Originally developed as an industrial dye and antifungal agent, malachite green was sometimes used to treat potatoes before processing. The goal was to prevent bacterial and fungal growth during storage and shipping. The problem was that this chemical wasn't designed for human consumption, and studies found that long-term exposure in animals led to organ damage and an increased risk of cancer. Despite these concerns, regulation lagged behind global trade. While the FDA never approved malachite green for food use in the US, some imported fries, particularly frozen varieties, tested positive for traces of the chemical. Seafood lovers in the 1980s had no shortage of options. From all-you-can-eat shrimp nights to roadside oyster shacks, shellfish were a delicacy that ranged from high-end dining to backyard boils. But behind the scenes, there was a major issue lurking in the industry: a lack of regulation on shellfish harvesting. At the time, many shellfish came from unregulated waters, meaning they were harvested without proper oversight for contamination. Shellfish, especially oysters and clams, are filter feeders, meaning they absorb whatever is in the water, including bacteria, heavy metals, and industrial runoff. When shellfish were harvested from polluted waters, they sometimes carried toxins, parasites, and dangerous bacteria like Vibrio and hepatitis A. Public health officials knew this was a problem, but enforcement was inconsistent. While some states had monitoring programs, many shipments of shellfish, especially imports, weren't properly inspected. Outbreaks of shellfish poisoning, including cases of paralytic shellfish poisoning, PSP, made headlines throughout the decade. Eventually, stricter laws were put in place. The Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference worked with the FDA to create tighter safety regulations, requiring more rigorous testing and tracking. In the 1980s, alcohol wasn't just about beer and cocktails. A new wave of flavored wine coolers took the market by storm, offering a sweeter, fruitier alternative to traditional drinks. Brands like Bartles and Jaymes led the charge, appealing to young adults who wanted something light, refreshing, and easy to drink. But some companies took things a step further, adding caffeine to the mix, a decision that would later lead to bans and major health concerns. Combining alcohol and caffeine might have seemed like a fun idea, but it created a dangerous effect. Alcohol is a depressant, while caffeine is a stimulant, masking the feeling of intoxication. People drank more without realizing how impaired they actually were. This wasn't just speculation. Studies found that caffeinated alcohol increased the risk of binge drinking, blackouts, and alcohol poisoning. By the early 2000s, newer products like Four Loko reignited the controversy, leading to nationwide bans. But the issue wasn't new. The foundation had already been laid decades earlier with caffeinated wine coolers. Eventually, the FDA stepped in, banning pre-mixed caffeinated alcoholic beverages in 2010. By the 1980s, salmon wasn't just a high-end delicacy. It was quickly becoming an everyday dinner option. Thanks to the rise of farmed salmon, grocery stores could offer it at lower prices, and restaurants could serve it year-round. But beneath the pink fillets and fancy plating, the industry was facing serious problems. In the early days, salmon farming was like the Wild West. Little regulation, few environmental controls, and plenty of health concerns. The biggest issue was overcrowding. Early salmon farms packed fish into small enclosures, creating the perfect breeding ground for parasites and disease. To keep infections under control, farmers turned to antibiotics and chemical treatments, some of which later raised concerns about contamination. Meanwhile, waste from the farms polluted surrounding waters, leading to long-term damage in coastal ecosystems. Consumers weren't aware of these problems. All they knew was that salmon had become more affordable and widely available. It wasn't until researchers started linking farmed salmon to higher levels of PCBs and other contaminants that public concern grew. By the 1990s and 2000s, governments stepped in, tightening regulations on antibiotics, feed quality, and farming conditions. In the 1980s, not everyone had the patience or the jaw strength for tough cuts of meat. The solution? A sprinkle of magic meat tenderizer, an instant powder that promised to turn even the toughest steak into something butter soft. For home cooks and restaurants alike, these products were a game changer. But what made them so effective also made them a concern. Many of these tenderizers relied on papain, from papayas, and bromelain, from pineapples, natural enzymes that break down muscle fibers. Used in small amounts, they were perfectly safe. But in the 80s, some brands took it too far, loading their products with unregulated concentrations of these enzymes. This led to serious questions about how much was too much. Overuse didn't just soften meat, it started breaking down proteins in the mouth and digestive tract, causing irritation and, in some cases, allergic reactions. Regulators took notice. By the 1990s, some countries banned certain high-potency versions, and the FDA placed stricter controls on their formulations. While meat tenderizers didn't disappear, the magic versions faded from store shelves. Soft, fluffy, and perfectly risen, bread in the 1980s was everything consumers wanted it to be. Whether it was sandwich loaves or dinner rolls, commercial bakeries had a secret ingredient to get that ideal texture: potassium bromate. Added to dough as an oxidizing agent, it strengthened gluten and gave bread a light, airy structure. But what seemed like a harmless baking trick turned into a serious health concern. By the late 20th century, researchers discovered that potassium bromate was linked to cancer in lab animals, particularly affecting the kidneys and thyroid. The problem was that, if not fully baked out, traces of the chemical could remain in the final product. While food manufacturers argued that proper baking eliminated any risks, health regulators weren't convinced. Countries like the UK, Canada, and the entire European Union banned potassium bromate outright, while Japan placed strict restrictions on its use. In the US, the FDA stopped encouraging its use but never fully banned it, leaving it up to states and manufacturers to phase it out. Some companies did, switching to safer alternatives, but others continued using it quietly. For kids in the 1980s, few things were more exciting than tearing into a brightly colored piece of candy. Whether it was lollipops, tamarind treats, or chewy sweets, candy was cheap, fun, and everywhere. But hidden beneath the sugary coating was something far more dangerous: lead. The issue wasn't the candy itself, but the packaging. In some cases, manufacturers used lead-based ink on wrappers or lead-glazed containers, especially for imported candies. Over time, lead particles leached into the candy, creating an invisible but serious health hazard. Children are especially vulnerable to lead poisoning, which can cause developmental delays, learning disabilities, and neurological damage. It wasn't until the late 80s and early 90s that health agencies took major action. The FDA and state health departments began cracking down on lead-contaminated candies, particularly those from Mexico and Asia, where regulations were less strict. Testing became routine, and by the 2000s, strict lead limits were enforced on all candy packaging and ingredients. Despite these dangers, candy never lost its appeal. Companies adapted, regulations tightened, and the problem slowly faded. The 1980s were a golden era for soft drinks. Whether it was cola, lemon lime, or neon-colored fruit sodas, carbonated beverages dominated American culture. But behind all the fizz and fun was a hidden ingredient that would later raise major health concerns: sodium benzoate. A common preservative, sodium benzoate was used to prevent mold and bacteria growth in sodas. It was cheap, effective, and kept soft drinks shelf-stable for months. But scientists later discovered a problem. When combined with ascorbic acid, sodium benzoate could form benzene, a known carcinogen. Studies found that exposure to benzene in high amounts was linked to leukemia and other serious health risks. At first, the issue went largely unnoticed. Regulators didn't begin investigating benzene levels in soft drinks until the 1990s, when independent studies raised alarms. By the early 2000s, the FDA and beverage companies quietly worked to reformulate products, reducing sodium benzoate or tweaking ingredients to prevent benzene formation. Despite the controversy, soda never lost its grip on consumers. New preservatives replaced the old ones, and the industry adapted. For decades, canned fruit was a kitchen staple. Canned peaches in particular were a favorite, whether spooned over ice cream, baked into cobblers, or eaten straight from the can. But in the 1980s, these sugary, syrupy treats were sometimes packed with more than just fruit. They also contained traces of lead, thanks to the cans they were stored in. Before modern packaging regulations, many food cans were sealed with lead-based solder, a practice that had been around for decades. While this worked well for durability, it created a serious health risk. Over time, acidic foods like peaches and other canned fruits could cause the lead to leach into the contents, exposing consumers to potential lead poisoning. Even in small amounts, lead can cause neurological damage, developmental issues in children, and long-term organ damage. The problem wasn't new, but it took years for regulations to catch up. By the late 1980s, the FDA and other health agencies started cracking down on lead-soldered cans, urging manufacturers to switch to safer materials. By 1991, the U.S. officially banned lead in food cans, forcing companies to adopt modern, lead-free alternatives. Fast food in the 1980s wasn't just convenient, it was an experience. Crispy fries, golden fried chicken, and burgers seared to perfection kept Americans coming back for more. But behind the addictive crunch of a deep-fried meal was an ingredient that would later be banned in multiple countries: trans fats. At the time, partially hydrogenated oils were the go-to frying medium. These fats extended shelf life, improved texture, and were cheaper than natural alternatives. Fast food chains relied on them heavily, not realizing or not admitting that trans fats were far worse than the saturated fats they were replacing. By the 1990s, research revealed the ugly truth. Trans fats raised bad cholesterol while lowering good cholesterol, increasing the risk of heart disease and strokes. Unlike other fats, they had no health benefits, only downsides. Regulators took notice, and by the early 2000s, the FDA began pushing for stricter labeling. In 2015, the agency took it a step further, declaring trans fats unsafe for human consumption. Fast food chains scrambled to reformulate their recipes, switching to healthier oils. In the 1980s, fried food wasn't just a guilty pleasure, it was a way of life. From crispy French fries to golden fried chicken, fast food chains relied on one key ingredient to get that perfect crunch: palm oil. It was cheap, stable at high temperatures, and gave food that signature crispiness that kept customers coming back. Palm oil was a frying favorite for a simple reason. It didn't break down as quickly as other oils, meaning fryers needed fewer oil changes. That saved companies money while ensuring every batch of fries came out perfectly golden. But what made palm oil convenient for business turned out to be a nightmare for both health and the environment. Health experts began raising concerns that palm oil, especially in its hydrogenated form, was high in saturated fats, which contributed to heart disease. Meanwhile, environmentalists were sounding alarms over mass deforestation in Southeast Asia, where rainforests were being cleared to make room for palm plantations, endangering species like orangutans. By the 2000s, regulations and public pressure forced many companies to switch to alternative oils or use only sustainable palm oil. While fried foods remain as popular as ever, the industry had to adapt. Once upon a time, no part of the animal went to waste. Pig skin and chicken feet were prized ingredients in kitchens around the world, celebrated for their rich flavors and gelatinous textures. Whether deep-fried into crispy pork rinds or slow-cooked into a hearty broth, these cuts weren't just byproducts, they were culinary traditions. In the 1980s, processed food companies found ways to incorporate pig skin and chicken feet into mass-produced snacks and canned soups. The appeal was obvious. They were cheap, packed with collagen, and could enhance texture in processed meats. But while home cooks knew how to prepare them safely, industrial-scale processing introduced problems. Food safety concerns began emerging as regulators took a closer look at unsanitary processing conditions and contamination risks. Chicken feet, for instance, had to be meticulously cleaned to remove bacteria, but shortcuts in mass production increased the risk of salmonella and other pathogens. Pig skin, often used in gelatin and snack foods, raised concerns over poor handling and unregulated sourcing. Over time, demand declined, and stricter food safety laws made large-scale production less viable. While still enjoyed in traditional cuisines, pig skin and chicken feet slowly faded from the world of processed foods. Movie nights in the 1980s weren't complete without the unmistakable smell of buttery popcorn filling the air. Microwave popcorn had become a household staple, quick, convenient, and loaded with that rich, buttery taste. But what gave it that flavor wasn't butter at all. It was diacetyl, an artificial compound later linked to serious health risks. Diacetyl was widely used in the food industry because it mimicked the taste and aroma of real butter without the cost. It made popcorn irresistible, turning a simple bag of kernels into a movie theater experience right at home. But for the workers producing that buttery goodness, there was a hidden danger. Factory employees who inhaled large amounts of diacetyl over time began developing bronchiolitis obliterans, a rare and irreversible lung disease so severe it was later nicknamed popcorn lung. By the early 2000s, studies confirmed that long-term exposure to diacetyl destroyed lung tissue, leading to lawsuits and increased scrutiny. The FDA didn't outright ban it, but mounting pressure led many companies to phase it out voluntarily. Microwave popcorn is still around, but today it's made with reformulated butter substitutes. In the 1980s, the rise of natural remedies and alternative medicine led to a booming market for Chinese herbal supplements. Promising increased energy, weight loss, and even longevity, these pills and powders found their way onto store shelves across the US. But while the labels claimed all natural, some of these supplements packed a hidden punch, one strong enough to get them banned. One of the most notorious ingredients was ephedra, a plant-based stimulant that acted as a powerful fat burner and energy booster. It worked too well. People using ephedra-based supplements experienced increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and, in some cases, deadly heart complications. Athletes and dieters swore by its effects, but doctors were alarmed by the risks. At the time, the supplement industry was loosely regulated, and many products hit the market without proper testing. It wasn't until the late 1990s and early 2000s, after a series of high-profile deaths linked to ephedra, that the FDA launched an investigation. By 2004, the US banned ephedra-containing supplements, marking one of the first major crackdowns on herbal remedies. In the 1980s, cheese lovers had plenty of options. Supermarkets stocked everything from classic American slices to imported European delicacies. But hidden among the gourmet selections was a risk that few consumers were aware of: unpasteurized cheeses that carried a serious health threat. At the time, many countries had looser restrictions on the importation of raw milk cheeses. Traditional varieties from France, Italy, and Spain, like Brie, Camembert, and Roquefort, were prized for their bold flavors, often made the same way for centuries. But there was a catch. Without pasteurization, these cheeses could harbor dangerous bacteria, including Listeria. Listeria wasn't just another foodborne illness. It was especially dangerous for pregnant women, the elderly, and those with weakened immune systems. Ingesting contaminated cheese could lead to listeriosis, a severe infection with a high fatality rate. The problem wasn't just theoretical. Multiple outbreaks were traced back to unpasteurized cheese, leading public health officials to take action. While raw milk cheese is still legal in some places, the days of casually buying unregulated imports at the grocery store are long gone. Super elastic bubble plastic was the stuff of legends, a whimsical toy that allowed children to create their own colorful, air-filled bubbles. Yet, beneath its vibrant allure lay hidden risks. The chemical composition of the plastic and the inhalation required to blow the bubbles raised health concerns, highlighting the complex balance between innovative play and safety. While captivating in its simplicity and creativity, Super Elastic Bubble Plastic's journey underscores the ongoing dialogue about the materials and methods used in toys, a conversation that continues to shape the landscape of play. Deep-fried butter balls are even worse than cheese curds because it's the same idea applied to balls shaped out of butter. Dipped in batter and usually served along with fries or hot wings, these were much more popular than you might think. Sure, they sound simple, but simple and tasty is more or less what an American needs. Deep-fried butter balls became popular enough to be served at state fairs in places like Iowa, Texas, Ohio, and South Carolina. You might be thinking how something so popular would go out of fashion. Well, fashion is dominated by ever-changing trends, and so is food. People would grow to dislike greasy foods that were high in fats and oil like deep-fried butter. At least this is one thing doctors can be happy went out of style today. Taco Bell once tried something different with the Bell Beefer, a taco burger hybrid that featured taco-seasoned beef, lettuce, cheese, and tomatoes on a soft burger bun. It was part of Taco Bell's efforts to innovate and offer new food concepts that mixed different culinary traditions. While it gained a dedicated following, the Bell Beefer was eventually discontinued as Taco Bell shifted focus to traditional Mexican-inspired items and simpler menu options to improve service speed. This strategic move was aimed at aligning Taco Bell's offerings more closely with customer expectations for a Mexican fast food chain, focusing on core products like burritos and tacos rather than hybrid items. This trend of exhausting an entire populations of animals for culinary thrills had spread to a lot more than just life beneath the sea. An example is foie gras, which was created by having ducks and geese go through a rather harmful diet of corn. To the point, they were force-fed the corn to ensure that they were fattened up properly. The damage this did to their livers cannot be stated in simple words, but the livers were the main part, so the market saw no reason to stop its routines. California was one of the first states to step up about it and ban this activity, even though the move got backlash. But even the Supreme Court rejected a case for removing the ban. Hopefully, the rest of the country takes a hint too, because the act of foie gras is quite unethical. Fortunately, most states have now banned force-fed and harmful diets for animals and thus automatically deemed foie gras illegal. The Austin Magic Pistol, a toy of the 1950s, exemplifies America's post-war innovation and the era's relaxed approach to safety, distinguished by its use of magic crystals that, when combined with water, propelled a plastic ball with a bang. This toy captured the imagination of many a young sharpshooter. However, its operation, essentially a controlled explosion, raised eyebrows. Classified as a firearm in numerous states today, the Austin Magic Pistol's fall from grace reflects a growing awareness of the need for stringent safety measures in children's playthings, a sign of changing times in American society. Suet pudding did have a lot of benefits to it when you ate it. At least the traditional version did. Now the Americans take on it as not exactly the healthiest variant of Suet pudding. Uncle Sam loves his beef and ale, and he imparted that love to citizens across every state. Suet pudding in America would typically be made with beef or steak paired with ale. Savory versions of the dish were not new, but this just abandoned the pudding element of the dish entirely. Calorically, you were sitting at around 86 grams for carbs and 62 grams for fats, but the real numbers were probably much higher. We will not lie though, it does taste pretty good. Almost enough that wanting to bring it back seems like a reasonable idea. People went overboard with the dish, as they tend to do when the only thing on their mind is taste. Savory puddings as a whole went out of style recently. In the mid-1990s, McDonald's launched the Arch Deluxe, a burger designed specifically for adults, featuring a quarter-pound beef patty, peppered bacon, lettuce, tomato, cheese, onions, and a distinctive mustard mayo sauce on a potato flour bun. It was part of an extensive marketing campaign aimed at attracting a more sophisticated adult demographic looking for premium fast food options. Despite significant investment in advertising, the Arch Deluxe did not resonate with the intended audience. The burger's higher price point and McDonald's entrenched reputation as a traditional fast food joint did not align well with the gourmet image they attempted to project. The lackluster sales led to the discontinuation of the Arch Deluxe, prompting McDonald's to refocus on strengthening its core offerings and broad market appeal, moving away from targeting niche segments. Another delicacy that is native to West Africa is Ackee Fruit, which in Jamaica is a widely consumed treat and is even their national fruit, but in America is currently banned by the FDA. This is all because Ackee Fruit, as tasty and soft as it can be, contains hypoglycin, which is a toxin that can cause an allergic reaction you really would not see coming. Let's just say it feels like one of the worst hangovers of your life, and that may be why the sickness caused by Ackee Fruit has a name. In the world of medicine, it is lovingly referred to as Jamaican vomiting sickness, but do not let pretenses fool you. If too much of it is consumed when it is very ripe, the fruit can very well be fatal. Hence why there's such a tight ban on it. Then, the tale of the Cabbage Patch Kids Snacktime Kids dolls, a late 90s sensation, brings a modern twist to our nostalgic journey. These dolls, designed to eat snacks fed by their young owners, captured hearts until an unforeseen hazard emerged. The mechanism that enabled this unique feature also posed a risk of entangling children's fingers and hair, leading to a recall in 1997. This incident highlights the ongoing challenges faced by toy manufacturers and regulators in ensuring the safety of innovative toys, a reminder of the delicate balance between creativity and caution in the world of children's playthings. Another item on the list that also happens to come packaged and is easy to carry around are canned cream soups. Usually, these would be your typical soup flavors, and they were cheap and affordable enough to buy regularly. Most great canned items get their start that way, but what really made this a hit was its unique taste that got people hooked. Having canned cream soup on afternoons was something every American in the 60s could relate to. Uniqueness does not always come from good places, though, because this soup's taste came from the fact that it was high in sodium, fats, and preservatives. Being the basis for most casseroles was not really helping its case. After all, there are many better soups to make that are just as easy and twice as healthy. So canned cream soups would be left behind like so many other canned items before it. So, something that people might still give an honest try today is cheese-stuffed crust pizza. As delicious as it sounds and an affordable pizza to order from most pizzerias and houses, this was the king of the market. Usually it would come with your typical flavors like pepperoni and chicken mushrooms or sausages, but it would also have cheese-only alternatives. Crusts stuffed only with cheese with a pizza that has nothing but cheese was something Americans did not think twice about. Places like New York and Georgia would have at least like a quarter of their sales just due to this alone. Still, as good as that sounds, if your second thought was that it sounds like it would make me gain a couple pounds, then you are right. Definitely something people started to consider ordering less and less as time went on, and the appeal of a gym membership slowly started settling in. Introduced in 1968, the Burger King Jumbo was a straightforward but hearty sandwich featuring hot ham and melted cheese on a toasted hoagie bun. It catered to customers seeking a warm, quick meal option, different from the typical burger offerings. The Jumbo gained popularity as a comforting food, especially appreciated during colder months. Despite its success, Burger King discontinued the Jumbo in the late 1970s to refocus its menu on core burger products, aiming to sharpen its competitive edge against McDonald's. The Jumbo made a brief comeback in 2014 as a nostalgic item, but was again phased out as Burger King continued to streamline operations and focus on globally marketable, high-selling items. Sassafras trees are deeply cherished cultural items because of their solace in the symbolism of many cultures, as well as the infamous Sassafras Tea that we keep hearing people raving about. A cup of this in the 70s was all you needed to fix your soul and wipe away the exhaustion of last week. However, the tree and tea itself may not be so healthy. The tea at least contains a carcinogen called safrole, which is found in large amounts in the tea, thereby making it pretty unsafe as well as a bad idea if you have any pre-existing breathing problems. Besides, some studies found that the root bark of the tree and the oil it secretes can be linked to cancer or liver damage. Maybe we should reevaluate how healthy this piece of foliage is? Barbie Rollerblade, a toy that sparkled with the promise of fun, took a sharp turn towards safety concerns in 1992. These dolls, equipped with rollerblades that emitted real sparks, captured the imagination of many until the potential fire hazard they posed came to light. The recall of Barbie rollerblade skates underscored the complexities of integrating dynamic features into toys and the paramount importance of thorough safety testing. This incident not only highlighted the challenges of innovation in toy design, but also reinforced the enduring commitment to safeguarding the joy and well-being of children. When we say cheese curds were not the worst offenders, we were not kidding, because deep frying went too far when deep-fried Mars candy bars were born. Donuts? Fine, they get fried to begin with. Cheese curds? All right, fried cheese works by frying Mars candy bars? Is sanity just a lost concept? People strangely loved this abomination more. Whether it was brought over by foreigners or was the nightmare brainchild of an experimental foodie, it was popular enough for people to consume it widely in many states. Some locals would even take it a step further and cover the chocolate with batter before deep frying it, because it might not have enough fat. You should really always make sure you get your fat needs taken care of. Since more Americans were getting worried that their needs were being taken care of a bit too much, deep-fried Mars became a thing of the past, and we say good riddance. Jack in the Box came up with a clever idea called Frings, which mixed fries and onion rings in one delightful package. This innovative offering allowed customers to enjoy both popular side dishes without having to choose between them. It was especially appealing because of its novelty and the convenience of sampling two different flavors in one order. Despite their popularity, Frings were eventually phased out as part of Jack in the Box's initiative to simplify its menu. The need to streamline operations and reduce kitchen complexity led to the decision to discontinue Frings. They were focusing more on straightforward, faster-to-prepare items that could be served to customers with shorter wait times, optimizing operational efficiency. In the 70s, the phrase, "let's get some shark fin soup," was not really that out of pocket. A lot of people enjoyed bowls of this at many restaurants across the USA, but local shark populations had to pay the price in a pretty nasty way as they got their fins removed and then were left in the ocean. While they were a tradition in some cultures, their use was not nearly as intense as the businesses constantly asking for more fins. Eventually, the Senate passed the Shark Fins Elimination Act, which thankfully now makes shark fin products illegal. Over the years, the constant efforts by hunters and other people looking to make a quick paycheck have endangered species, and today the number of sharks is at a record low. So, let's play. Clackers, those captivating orbs that danced a dangerous ballet in the hands of daring youngsters. Introduced to America's playgrounds in the swinging 60s, these simple toys of two balls connected by a string captivated many with their hypnotic clacking. Yet, this seemingly innocent pastime harbored a hidden peril. By the 1970s, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration stepped in, raising alarms over the toy's shattering risk. The hard acrylic could break, launching sharp shards into the air, a clear danger to any child's face or eyes. Thus, amid concerns and injuries, clackers were subjected to stringent safety regulations, forever changing their presence in the hands of American youth. Another popular snack turned into a fried food was fried Oreos. Now we know what you are thinking, that these are probably even worse than Mars. While we would not blame you, fried Oreos were popular with so many people that the taste was its only saving grace. Oreos dipped in a creamy batter, then deep-fried, tasted like heaven to young adults. As the recipe got trendier, people across the states thought it might be worth trying. Unfortunately, America did not seem to think so when it would move toward the 80s and early 2000s. More and more people disliked the idea of greasy food, and all the excess sugar really did not make it more appealing. Deep-fried Oreos went back to being a bad idea on a Saturday night, and people started having Oreos with milk, as God intended. McDonald's introduced the McDLT in the 1980s, and it was pretty innovative with its packaging that kept the hot beef patty separate from the lettuce and tomato. This was all thanks to a styrofoam container with dual compartments, one for the hot side and one for the cool side. The idea was to deliver a burger that tasted super fresh by maintaining the integrity of its cooler ingredients. However, despite its initial popularity, the environmental impact of the styrofoam packaging became a big issue. As environmental awareness grew, pressure mounted on McDonald's to drop the McDLT to cut down on waste. Ultimately, McDonald's discontinued the McDLT in the early 1990s, choosing to prioritize environmental concerns over the unique selling proposition of the burger. Bushmeat, on the other hand, is something that carries a natural risk to it. No human interference needed this time. This is an umbrella term that refers to all kinds of animals caught in the wilds of Africa for daily sustenance. And when we say all kinds, please take that to heart. Bats, lions, as well as monkeys, literally nothing is off the table. These wild animals carry diseases with them, and during the Ebola outbreak from 2013 to 2016, governments started banning the hunting and consumption of bushmeat. It is still smuggled in illegally, though, and it goes for a pretty hefty price. The saga of lawn darts, or jarts, as they were colloquially known, is a somber chapter in toy history. Introduced in the 1960s, these metal-tipped darts, intended for outdoor play, soon revealed a darker side. After causing numerous injuries and tragically fatalities, lawn darts were banned in 1988 in the United States. This ban served as a watershed moment in toy safety, illustrating the critical need for oversight and regulation in children's playthings. The story of lawn darts remains a powerful reminder of the responsibilities manufacturers and regulators bear in ensuring the well-being of young enthusiasts. In the 1970s, McDonald's introduced onion nuggets, a unique side item consisting of chopped onions, breaded and fried. They were crafted as a vegetarian snack option before the famous Chicken McNuggets made their debut. The onion nuggets had a simple yet appealing composition, with a crispy exterior and a soft, flavorful onion inside, typically served with various dipping sauces. Despite their distinct taste and novelty, the introduction of Chicken McNuggets shifted McDonald's focus towards expanding its chicken offerings. Consequently, onion nuggets were discontinued. The shift was part of a broader strategy to streamline the menu, focusing on items with broader appeal and higher sales potential, emphasizing chicken over onion-based snacks. Speaking of traditions, one long-held custom in upper society and luxury cuisine was Beluga Caviar, as you may have heard. The USA had an infamously high appetite for it, consuming around 60% of the world's caviar, but that meant that, like sharks, beluga sturgeons were not safe in their own waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to ban the buying or selling of any beluga products, as the fish today faces a serious threat of extinction because of overfishing. It might be tasty, but there's certainly no need to fish enough of them to wipe their entire gene pool clean. At least we think that's the sane take. Caviar is still one of the most widely consumed luxury cuisines in America, but beluga caviar has been effectively banned from mass production. Who knows? Maybe one day the rest of the caviar varieties may suffer the same fate. The Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper missile toy, a marvel of the late 70s, brought the excitement of space battles to Earth. However, the small missile parts, designed to launch from the toy, became a source of grave concern following a choking incident that tragically ended in a child's death. This event in 1978 led to a swift recall and served as a critical lesson in the design and safety of toys with small detachable parts. It underscored the importance of foreseeing potential risks in toy design, ultimately influencing stricter safety standards and practices in the toy industry, ensuring that the imagination's flight does not come at the cost of safety. Crisco-based frosting was a much-needed break from deep frying both for America in the past and this list. Tasty enough that even grandmas in the past had their own variants and homemade takes, it became a very popular shortening. People loved having this on their cake or dessert, and back then, food analysts had not fully calculated the risks of trans fats. Ever since food science did take that step later on when bans were put on trans fats, the frosting abandoned it. Crisco frosting lacks one thing to make that change appealing, which is any nutritional benefit. Whether you are trans fat-free matters little if you have no health benefit to offer. In the short run, it was Flavor Town, nothing short of a sublime culinary experience. Better to leave shortenings like this in the past than bring them back, though, since shortenings today still do not have any nutritional pros. Jack in the Box expanded its menu to include hot ham and cheese, a sandwich that featured sliced ham and melted cheese on a sesame seed bun, warmed to enhance flavor and texture. It was marketed as a quick, satisfying meal, perfect for those seeking a comforting lunch option. The hot ham and cheese gained popularity for its gooey, savory qualities but was discontinued as Jack in the Box overhauled its menu in the late 1990s. The decision was part of a strategy to simplify the menu and focus on items that required simpler preparation processes and had broader customer appeal, aiming to improve operational efficiency and reduce complexity. Casu Marzu, luckily, was not an animal species that was almost wiped out, but a vintage Italian cheese that involved sheep's milk, which was heated and then curdled for 3 weeks. Now this gave it one hell of a flavor and a sensation that other cheese just could not hold a candle to, but the process was beyond icky. Within 3 weeks of curdling, flies would be drawn to the milk and they would bombard it with their eggs, naturally turning into maggots. The maggots would then eat the milk, which had rotted a fair bit by now, and then let out some kind of substance that gave Casu Marzu its fame. For a lot of people, this might be too much, and that's definitely a fair hill to die on. Luckily, the government is one of those groups, and it banned this cheese for not meeting health standards. Ortolans suffered the worst of animal cruelty in a way that really makes you realize no dish is ever worth that kind of torture to another being. Ortolans themselves are these very small songbirds that get imported from France, and they really are about the size of an average thumb. Ortolans were prized for their flavor more than anything else, and eating them was considered to be a pastime of royals reserved exclusively for them. The way it would be prepared was sick, with the tiny things first being blinded to be overfed and then being thrown in brandy before they got marinated live. That's enough to make us lose our appetite for sure, and luckily it was banned in 1999 due to animal abuse. Frying donuts was not the only thing people got up to back then, because fried cheese curds would soon be the next headache of health professionals nationwide. To make matters much worse, states like Wisconsin started having a craze for beer-battered cheese curds. Pair that with deep frying and yeah, you will probably need to get some suits altered. It is not a bad thing to indulge in unhealthy foods, and it is not like most of the cuisine of today is as healthy as it should or could be. People back then liked eating fried comfort food without any regard for health disadvantages. We do not blame them. Fried items are attractive, and frying cheese curds was a unique new recipe in town. Why would they not enjoy the food to their fullest? Funnily enough, these curds are not even the worst offender on the list. McDonald's ventured into the pizza market in the late 1980s with McPizza, offering a family-oriented dine-in option and tapping into the growing popularity of pizza. Despite its potential, McPizza struggled with long wait times and required additional kitchen equipment, which complicated operations. These factors were inconsistent with McDonald's model of quick service and efficiency. By the late 1990s, McPizza was discontinued as McDonald's decided to concentrate on its core offerings like burgers and fries. The removal was driven by the need to maintain operational efficiency and streamline menu options, focusing on products that were quicker and simpler to prepare. Nobody can go without margarine, the all-time quintessential breakfast food that everyone from everywhere, both in and out of the US, can agree on. One of the more relaxing parts of spreading big dabs of margarine on your toast is knowing that it is not really bad for you, and that should be the case by all means until you add trans fats in. These fats would be put into the spread, and this was an industry-wide practice until it got banned by the FDA as it became linked to heart disease and diabetes. In particularly extreme cases, it puts you at a higher risk for cancer, and that is just too much trouble for butter of all things. Next, let's recall the Creepy Crawler's Thing Maker, an innovation that turned the ordinary American kitchen into a mini monster factory. Launched in the 1960s, this device allowed children to create a plethora of rubbery creatures from heated plastic. However, its very design, featuring an open heating element, posed a significant risk. Burns became a troubling consequence for unsuspecting young creators, leading to a redesign aimed at ensuring safety. Despite its enthralling promise of endless fun, the Thingmaker's hazardous potential marked a pivotal moment in the evaluation of toy safety standards during that era. Speaking of protein, canned meat pies were another really popular dish that people could not get enough of back in the day. Standing out from the rest of the crowd at the time by being both delicious and transportable as well as affordable, these pies were a knockout. Stuffed with meat and topped heavily with gravy, they were one of the best Thanksgiving meals after the big turkey. People could not get enough of the varieties of meats that would often be used like buffalo or deer. Giving each can its own unique flavor profile depending on the main ingredient. Sadly, these are probably the most easy to digest and diet-friendly meal on the list today, yet they are nowhere to be found now. Pawpaw Seeds are another exhibition that proves not all of nature's bounty is to be treasured, and there are parts of indeed Mother Nature herself that are actually pretty bad for children. Pawpaw seeds have been linked to nerve damage and liver damage, and this is all because of a toxin called ananac. The government would ban pawpaw seeds as well as advising the public not to eat the skin of the fruit, but naturally very few actually paid attention. We are not sure how many hospital trips have been induced just because of the seeds of this fruit, but the takeaway is definitely to not eat every part of whatever fruit you happen to find. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know which of these foods shocked you to your core.